Okay, good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome to Season 3, Episode 3 of The Backyard Naturalist, taking on a long overdue topic, an inhabitant of our backyards, whether it's our backyard grass or it's the grass outside of your apartment or condo or the park. One of the most recognizable and one of the coolest critters around, the protozoa. My name is Tim, and I'll be telling protozoa stories for the next half hour or so. And I mentioned it on the last episode, and I stand by my claim. If you don't love protozoa by the end of this program, I haven't done my job. And also, we were talking before this with the folks that are here live. Welcome to the third week of meteorological fall, or the last week of astronomical summer. However you keep track, it could either be summer or fall. According to me, we are solidly in fall. It's my favorite season to experience hygge, which is a Danish term that translates as a quality of coziness and comfortable conviviality that engenders a feeling of contentment or well-being, which is what I feel in my backyard and other green spaces this time of year. I absolutely love fall. And we've been doing a lot of celebrating over the past few weeks, we as humans. So September 6th was Labor Day, and also marked the beginning of the celebration of Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish Day of New Year. September 11th was Enkutatash, or the Ethiopian New Year, and September 13th marked the anniversary of the date that the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. And next Tuesday, September 21st, marks the Mid-Autumn or Moon Festival, celebrated by many people from East and Southeast Asia. So many reasons to celebrate, and I hope you find many reasons to celebrate this fall. Once again, a huge thank you goes out to those of you who support this program through a seasonal subscription, and shout out to members of the Urban Ecology Center. If you are a member, you should have already received information about the UEC's online merchandise outlet, in which members receive a 20% off discount code for all supplies while they last. And for more information, you can contact membership manager Glenna Holstein. And in just a couple of weeks, you can support the center by taking part in Hike Milwaukee. We're offering many different varieties of hikes at all UEC locations for a whole week with lots of great people, and it's a fantastic way to support the center. You can register for a hike or hikes, you can fundraise in your community, and or you can donate. I'm personally taking part in history walks at Washington Park and Riverside Park, and a wildlife at night hike at Washington Park. So I'd love to see you there. For more information on hike, please visit our website. And the research team is going to be out next week on an Ecotravel trip, but we've got some fantastic lineups in the coming weeks from folks at the Wisconsin DNR and Sea Grant, discussing local sturgeon conservation, wild rice outreach, and an Eat Wisconsin fish program. And after that, we've got some fun October Halloween material as we explore the creepy, dark, and mysterious and wonderful worlds of daddy longlegs, worms, and beetles to take you through the Halloween season. So be sure to tune in here every Friday morning at 9 a.m. We'll always be here to meet some really cool people and learn some great things about our backyards and the local community. And if you become a subscriber, you never have to register. We will personally deliver the Zoom link to your doorstep to show our gratitude for your support. And we are tantalizingly close to learning about protozoa, but I did mention Ecotravel earlier, and the Urban Ecology Center will soon be announcing our next trip, which will be sailing around Penobscot Bay in Maine for 4 nights aboard the Louis R. French, which is the oldest operating schooner in the United States. We'll island hop around the bay, explore the coast, do a little hiking, have an oceanside lobster bake as we are immersed in marine maritime wildlife. So please contact me for details or any member of the research team to reserve your spot. The trip is May 31st through June 6th, this coming spring of 2022. Okay, finally, the star of the morning, the amazing protozoa. And I'm embarrassed to say how little I knew of protozoa before preparing for today. And yet this group represents one of the largest groups of life on the planet. So big that depending on who you talk to, it has its own kingdom. And, think of all the species in the plant kingdom, in the animal kingdom, maybe you know some in the mushroom kingdom. And I'm guessing and making some big assumptions here, but I'm guessing you probably know a little bit about bacteria, but protozoa, along with archaea, which we featured last season, and chromists, which I promise we'll cover in the future, are known mostly by a small set of microbiologists and those in specialized fields or other areas. I know medical students need to learn a lot about them because of the human diseases that they can be associated with. But the stories begin to grab me just by knowing that the name translates to first animal, proto meaning first, like a prototype, and zoa meaning animal. Think zoology or just zoo. So first animal. And I realize that I'm solidly camped in Western science in this program, so I apologize for that skewing. But if we go back to the Western scientist that really took on and is best known for the classification scheme, we begin our story of how we became to understand the protozoa. So spoiler alert, they're not animals, but you might see why for many years we called them animals. So Carl Linnaeus, the Swedish botanist, started us off pretty easy. He classified life into two groups. You were either a plant or an animal, and that's it. Or maybe more accurately, a vegetable or an animal. And incidentally, for those of you that care, the term vegetable actually has no botanical meaning to it. It's pretty much every plant is made up of vegetative matter, and that includes the roots, the leaves, the fruits, and everything. So technically a fruit is a vegetable, but we tend to use the word vegetable for parts of the plants that we eat that aren't fruit. Because again, it's nice to be able to put things in boxes. So a fruit is a botanical term, a berry is a botanical term, but a vegetable is not. So we go into this a little bit in season 2 with as gourd as it gets. And I'm sure we'll bring it up again, but in 1735, if you're a biology student, it was pretty easy. Linnaeus classified life into just those two kingdoms, the plants and the animals. More than 100 years later, in 1836, that stood with us for 130 years, a third kingdom is introduced, and it's recognized particularly with the invention of the telescope, the microscope, excuse me, that not all life can be seen. So it's not easy just to say you're a plant, you're an animal. Some organisms are so tiny that they can only be seen in a microscope, and sometimes only as a single cell. So it was thought that these tiny microscopic forms of life were neither plants nor animals, and it was thought that these were likely the most ancient forms of life, and so they were given the names prototistas, or first organisms, which was later shortened to protists, which is a term that I'm sure many of you have heard before. And so now we have 3 kingdoms of living organisms, and you have plant, animals, and protists. And I love this awesome representation. This is the diagram of natural bodies, or the 4 kingdoms of nature. And they put minerals into a kingdom, so things that are not alive. And then you have the 3 kingdoms of life. So you still have your animals and plants, which are the familiar ones you can see, and that Linnaeus worked on, and those are represented by the 2 pyramids. But then you have a third kingdom, now that we know that there's this tiny life, and that's that greenish, hazy, muddled up section between the 2 pyramids at the base. And that combines all microscopic life into a kingdom. That's in this diagram, they call the primogenal kingdom, but later is called the protista kingdom. So protista, first life, is a combination of protozoa, or first animals, and protophyta, or first plants. And I think that's pretty darn cool. So this is the first use of the term protozoa. And we don't really hear the term protophyta very much anymore, but even in the microscopic kingdom, everything is still thought of in the plants versus animal dichotomy. So mushrooms at this point are still lumped with the plants. And so at this point, I'm still following everybody. 3 kingdoms: plants, animals, and the tiny stuff, the protists, the first life. That stands for another 60 years. And then they decided to just throw the whole system out go back to the drawing board and reshuffle life back into just two groups, but not animals and plants. At this point, it's the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. And we move from the term kingdoms to the term empires, because that's so much more powerful. So the eukaryotic empire differs from the prokaryotic empire in that eukaryotic cells have a nucleus that's enclosed in a nuclear membrane and other membrane-bound organelles. So no matter how big or small you are, macroscopic, microscopic, plant, animal, the only thing that matters at this point regarding which group you belong to is whether your cells have these membrane-bound organelles. So that's how we divide life. That lasts for a little more than a decade before we kind of think, maybe that kingdom system wasn't so bad. So we go back to having kingdoms again. And we also decide to add a kingdom because we don't want to completely get rid of that work with the eukaryotes and the prokaryotes. So we take the eukaryotes, the more ancient group, and I'm sorry, the eukaryotes is the more advanced group, and we put those back into their three kingdoms that we had previously. So the eukaryotes become the animals, the plants, and the protists again. But we want to keep that separation of eukaryotic cells, prokaryotic cells based on their internal structure, excuse me. So the prokaryotes become the kingdom Monera. And more importantly, we kind of start to move away from this idea that all of these divisions are just about size. We start to realize that some microscopic animals are actually way more advanced than others. So now instead of kind of all microscopic life being lumped as protists, the main feature that we look at is how advanced that cell is in life. So again, now we're at four kingdoms, the Monera, the animals, the plants, and the protists. And in this depiction you see here, they call the animals metazoan and the plants metaphyta. That system lasts for another 30 years before we add a fifth kingdom. And this is what my generation learned in school, the 5 kingdom classification system. And really the biggest change here is that up until this point, multicellular fungi were classified as plants. But we finally recognize that fungi, regardless of their size, deserve their own kingdom. And this is what my textbooks told me. There were 5 kingdoms. This is what I learned. You have Monera, the prokaryotes, you have protists, you have animals, plants, and fungi. And really the protists are starting to become this kind of clearinghouse for everything that doesn't fit in the other groups nicely. So you're starting to get a little cross-eyed here. So am I, but we're almost done. And the next few steps are pretty important in the protozoa story. So,
hey, Tim.
Yeah.
Someone is wondering what determines advanced.
Well, that really, I use the term advanced loosely. It's that internal makeup. So a cell is not just a cell. A cell can be very simple, or with the organelles that are in it, what's happening inside of the cell. You're talking like hundreds of millions of years of evolution. A cell isn't just a cell, isn't just a cell. So maybe advanced isn't the best word, but they become different. So, the Monera and the prokaryotes still have that simple concept where the inside isn't divided into all of these things. And then you start to get the nucleus and the nuclear membrane and mitochondria and all those kind of what I meant when I said advanced. So evolutionarily, they're kind of straying from that basic plan. So I hope that makes sense. I'm definitely not a microbiologist. All right. So right about the time that I graduate from high school in 1991, those scientist folk decide that we're getting complacent, and they decide to just shake everything up again, which was just great for me because now all that rote memorization I did in high school is thrown out the door. So now I need to learn an entirely new system in college. They got rid of kingdoms and introduced this new cool term of the day called domains. So we went from 5 kingdoms to now having 3 domains, and they took all 4 of those eukaryotic kingdoms and lumped them into the domain eukarya. So we kind of went backwards. And now we don't have to go through all that trouble of distinguishing a plant from an animal because they, along with the protists and the fungi, are now part of the eukaryotic domain. But since they lumped the eukaryotes, they also decided to divide the prokaryotes into bacteria and archaebacteria, which makes a lot of sense because there's a lot represented in that one big group of eukaryotes and a lot of life. So the bacteria and the archaebacteria is later shortened to archaea. When they realized that archaebacteria weren't a type of bacteria, they were separate. And you can revisit that in the episode Raiders of the Lost Archaea from season 2. So I'll skip over that now. And this system lasted all of 8 years, which meant just as I was starting grad school, I could once again learn a new system. Yay. And the new and improved system went back to the roots of the 1920s. And they said, you know what? Maybe those people back 75 years ago really had it right all along. So they brought back the 2 empire system of prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but they kept the kingdoms around 2 and added a 6th kingdom, because I think their true goal was really at this point just to confuse folks. They recombined bacteria and archaea into the kingdom of bacteria. So now they said they're no longer separate, which was then also its own empire. And then they divided up all of those eukaryotes again, but this time they divided up the protists, that clearinghouse, into chromista and protozoa. So finally, 1998 marks the first time that protozoa show up as their own kingdom. And this system lasted all the way until 7 years later, when they moved to the current system, which now is so straightforward that you can just read the slide for yourself and completely understand it on your own. And then when you do, please explain it to me. But until then, I think we have now a 2-empire, 7-kingdom system. The eukaryotic empire is divided once again into bacteria and archaea, and the prokaryotic empire is divided into plants, animals, fungi, chromists, and protozoa. So that, my friends, is the wonderful story of how protozoa came to be. They started out as protists, and then they became eukaryotes, and then prototists, then protists, then eukaryotes again. Then for the last 23 years, they've been protozoa. So now that you're all either asleep or dizzy, let's tell some more fun stories of protozoa. So protozoa, or first animals, as we now know, is a group of single-celled eukaryotes. They are both free-living in your backyards and parasitic in your bodies. They feed on organic matter, either living or dead, and they have many animal-like behaviors. Many of them eat other organisms and move around, and they don't have a cell wall like plants and algae, and they can't produce their own food, which is why for so long they were considered single-cell animals and given the name protozoa, or first animal. But they're not animals, and that's a problem to some today. In fact, in news that I'm very surprised didn't make the front page, the members of the Society of Protozoologists recently voted to change their name to the International Society of Protistologists, because protozoa are not considered animals like protozoa suggests. And I know that shook me to my core, and I'm sorry if you're hearing it here first, but I kind of agree that protozoa may not be the best choice because they're not animals, unless you kind of think of the root word protozoa as ancient animal. And that in that case, it kind of makes sense, or the precursor to animals. But I don't know, at the rate they've been changing the classification system, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens soon. And if I'm lucky, as soon as my kids start to learn it, then I'll have to learn a new system again. Protozoa have a astonishingly wide range of sizes. The smallest is about 1 micron long. And for reference, the diameter of a human hair is 50 microns long. So you could fit 50 of the smallest protozoa in the world across a cross-section of a single hair. The largest protozoa can be found in deep ocean environments, and they can reach lengths of almost 8 inches long. Now remember, that's a single cell that is 8 inches long, which totally turned upside down my perception of what a single-celled organism is. There are many nuclei in that cell, but technically it is a single-celled organism that also produces a shell. So mind is kind of blown on that one. Protozoa have a very interesting habitat type that is called everywhere. They're free swimming in saltwater, oceans. They're swimming in lakes and all the brackish stuff in between. They're in the soil. They're part of the diverse moss community we've talked about in the past. Like bacteria and archaea, they're also found in very hostile environments like hot springs and hypersaline bodies of water. But one thing that they do require, at least for part of their lives, just like amphibians, is a moist environment. But if conditions dry up, they are able to pass the time as a dormant cyst until the conditions improve again, which is incidentally one of the characteristics that makes them very good as parasites that will pass between organisms like mosquitoes and people. Sometimes they can hide out in a certain state for a while and then switch to others, or they can hide in your body and hide from your immune system. So many species are parasitic, or many are symbiotic with host organisms. Many are completely harmless, and many are beneficial. And then, of course, some are deadly, as we'll see when we kind of look at some of the individual species or groups of species. So what do protozoans eat? So again, like animals, they are heterotrophs, meaning they have to consume other organic material and they can't make their own nutrients like plants. But the differences from animals kind of emerge quickly. First, they have many different ways of eating. So they can kind of overtake and surround and engulf food, like an amoeba, in a process called phagocytosis. Other protozoa actually have a little mouth-like aperture, like you see on the one on the bottom, that probably was an inspiration for at least a Jim Henson Muppet or two. And they use that to ingest food. And other protozoa absorb organic nutrients directly through the cell membrane. And some will even change their style of feeding within their life cycle. So that's all pretty cool on its own, but like a good adapter, hundreds of millions of years of evolution through natural selection have produced some pretty novel ways of obtaining or supplementing nutrients. And this is where we really stray from the animal lifestyle. Many protozoan species will actually not eat, but usurp algae from the environment. They'll just kind of take them in as hitchhikers. So they're not ingesting them, they're incorporating those algae symbionts into their own cell membrane, and they continue to live their lives. So that's a great case of mutualism where both the animal and the plant benefit. Actually, they're not animals, where the protozoa and the plant benefit. The algae provides the protozoa with supplemental food through photosynthesis. They're still photosynthesizing. And then the protozoa provide the algae with a safe place to live. So that's a relationship we've seen other places. So not unlike a lichen or coral. And this is called a mixotrophic relationship. And on the right-hand picture is a paramecium, excuse me, that has that mixotrophic relationship with all those little algae that it's incorporated into its body. But some protozoan take advantage of kleptoplasty. So klepto for stealing. And in this very bizarre relationship, a protozoan will consume the algae, but it doesn't metabolize everything. It says, oh, you've made some really cool chloroplasts. I could use those chloroplasts. And they'll take them from the algae, and then those chloroplasts will become part of the protozoan and will continue to photosynthesize for that new host long after the original algae that they used to work for is consumed. So, I mean, that would be like if I ate a spinach leaf, and then after I ate that spinach, it would photosynthesize for my body. It would maybe come to the surface and say, hey, Tim, I'll make you some extra food here. And that would happen for months after I ate the spinach. So providing me with extra carbohydrates. So super cool. And it still gets crazier. So we have a protozoa that eats algae, co-opts the chloroplasts, kind of turning itself into a plant for a while. But then they, in turn, can be preyed upon by a dinoflagellate. And then astonishingly, the chloroplasts from the original algae continue to work for the predator of the predator. So it would be like if a bird ate a lightning bug and then gained the ability to glow in the dark, and then a fox ate the bird and then also gained that ability to glow. So I don't know, maybe that's not the best example, but how cool is it that a secondary predator is able to gain function from chloroplasts that its own food ate? So, and remember, protozoa are not plants, so they can't photosynthesize on their own, but by eating those plants, they gain that kind of plant superpower of photosynthesis for weeks or even months after the original owner of those organelles died. So I don't know, that might be the coolest backyard naturalist fact I've ever come across. So we'll move on from diet to answer a simpler question. How do protozoa move? They move like many other microscopic organisms. Some species use flagella, or those kind of undulating swimming tails, to move around. It's always more than one tail. And those are called flagellated protozoa. It's one of the ways that we characterize protozoa. Other species are called ciliated protozoa, and they use cilia, or many different hairs around the entire body, to move around in the medium. Other species move around like amoebas, in that they create these kind of foot-like appendages, the same appendages that they use to engulf their prey, they'll also use to move around. Those are called pseudopods, or false feet. And that's how they kind of move through the environment. And then some species are sessile, they're attached to the substrate and they don't move at all. So many biology teachers can purchase these sessile protozoa, put them in a petri dish, they'll stick to the bottom. They're large enough to be seen with the naked eye, even though, again, they're single cell. And then they often use those to study predator-prey relationships with the microalgae that they eat. And again, some species will change forms within their life cycles, particularly the ones that are parasites. And unbeknownst to me, until I reviewed the presentation, I just happened to get 3 of the major motility groups in the opening slide. So Andre Benjamin here is represented by a ciliated protozoa. Will Farrell has a flagellated protozoa in the center, and then Woody Harrelson has a sessile or attached protozoa. And then we tackle the question, how do protozoa reproduce? And this is also, well, cool and different. So like everything else, it's varied and complicated. They can reproduce by the simplest method that many organisms do, binary fission. So a cell divides the inner parts, and then the whole cell becomes 2 cells, each with their own parts. They also go through separate stages where they exchange genetic material with other protozoa. But what's different from animals is that these 2 processes are not necessarily tied to each other. So in animals, genetic exchange happens during reproduction, but in protozoa, genetic exchange happens independently of reproduction. So you can reproduce and just become bigger clones of yourself, or you can exchange genetic material without sex. So, there are some cases where these 2 processes are coupled, but there are so many different species of protozoan, and they all have so many different adaptations that it's really kind of hard to pin down what a typical case is of just about anything. So then we can move on to the role of protozoa in ecology. And as I mentioned, there are so many species with so many different adaptations that it's hard to say specifically how important they are. But one thing for sure is it's impossible to overestimate their role in ecological communities. Mainly, they're consumers and predators of microfungi, algae, and bacteria. They're decomposers, and they are also consumed by many different kinds of microinvertebrates. So they're supporting of the food chain. They're moving nutrients through the food web and allowing our diverse plant communities. So at this point, we'll take a quick break to watch our first video. This is on protozoa. And as one of the more underappreciated, in my opinion, parts of the natural communities, I couldn't find any David Attenborough narrated segments that I usually like to use, or I couldn't find anything produced by the major media outlets. Almost everything is medical, again, because it's really studied in the medical field. But I did find this little gem on the interweb, and this person might become my new favorite narrator. So we'll take a listen. You might have to adjust the volume on your computer.
In the first instance, we tend to answer mosquito. But that is not entirely right. Malaria is not caused by the mosquito, it is only transmitted by this vector. Malaria is caused by the organisms belonging to the genus Plasmodium. And what are these organisms? Well, they fall in the next category of microbes that we will be learning in this video. The third category of microorganisms, these are called the protozoa. As the name suggests, proto stands for primitive, while zoan means animal. Wait a second, Are we saying these are organisms primitive to animals? Yes, they are unicellular in nature. However, the single cell has highly complex functions. Hence, they are also referred to as the pinnacle of unicellular complexity. So, what do you think will be their structure? Well, they have a typical eukaryotic cell structure. Thus, the nucleus and the membrane-bound organelles form an integral part of the cell. Many of them possess food vacuoles which are used to store food. And these cells do not have a cell wall. Are there any more special features? Many of them have additional features like cilia or flagellum for locomotion. Cilia are these tiny hair-like structures which are present throughout the body. Flagellum, on the other hand, is usually a slender long filament which is single or rarely multiple in number. Now this was their structure. What could be their nutrition type? Here we are referring to whether they are autotrophic, that is self-nourishing, or heterotrophic, meaning they cannot prepare their own food. We know that these cells are like animal cells and have mobility. So do you think they will be autotrophic like plants? Of course not. These are heterotrophic in nature. Yes, they are dependent on other organisms as their food source. Only a few rare exceptions include the chlorophyll containing euglena. It usually performs photosynthesis, but others lack the capacity to do so. Many organisms belonging to the protozoan group are well-known parasites. They derive nutrition directly from the body of living organisms. So they do not kill the host, but do harm them severely. A few commonly known examples of protozoans include amoeba, euglena, paramecium, and the disease-causing plasmodium. This was about the third category, that is the protozoa. In the next video, we will discuss the last type, that is the algae, in detail.
I really enjoyed that whole series of videos. I'll send you all the link. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Could watch it again. All right. So after their primary role in the ecology of being part of the food web and eating a lot of things and being eaten by a lot of things, probably their second most prominent role in communities is as a parasite. So again, most protozoa are harmless, but many can be quite harmful to humans or other species. And again, their ability to become dormant as a cyst actually is a useful one as a parasite, where they can protect themselves until the right conditions are met in the right host. So we'll start our protozoa tour with one of the most infamous and notorious offenders, starting with Plasmodium falciparum. This is actually, when I mentioned the smallest of the protozoa, one form of this protozoan life cycle is that smallest protozoa in the world, the one that's only 1 micron long. And it's also the culprit that causes malaria in humans. So it's transmitted through the bite of a female Anopheles mosquito and is responsible for about half of all malaria cases, and also is a carcinogen associated with the development of a type of blood cancer, and therefore is regarded as the deadliest parasite in humans. It enters through the saliva of mosquitoes and then quickly disrupts red blood cells. And then it's also able to hide out from our immune system in the liver and can cycle for a very long time. So we consider the mosquito as one of the deadliest creatures on the planet. And that's where we kind of started that video to humans. So that is true, but they're also just the messenger for these deadly diseases like this particular protozoan parasite that causes malaria. Many of us in Milwaukee are very familiar with the protozoa genus Cryptosporidium, which caused a huge illness outbreak in Milwaukee in 1993. It was the largest waterborne disease in US history when one of our water purification plants was contaminated. It made many, many people, over 400,000 people sick, and unfortunately was fatal, especially to the elderly and those with suppressed immune systems. The upside of that outbreak is what was a huge investment in our water filtration system that now, from what I understand, results in Milwaukee having one of the safest water systems around. You may also have heard of Taxoplasma Gandia, which we discussed in our episode on domestic cats. So this protozoa is associated with a number of neurological problems in humans and can be fatal for infants and fetuses, and is found in cat feces. It's part of the cycling, which is why it's strongly advised that pregnant women in particular stay away from the cat litter box. And this particular protozoa may be found, this is scary, may be found in a chronic form in up to half of the humans worldwide, because cats are so popular. And the tour of fun continues, as protozoa are also associated with leishmaniasis from sandflies, and Chagas disease with the kissing bug, African sleeping sickness with the tsetse fly. You notice that a lot of them have these other hosts, these non-human hosts that they cycle through. Trichomoniasis, it's a sexually transmitted disease, and then Giardia intestinalis, which you know what that is. So yeah, protozoa are amazing, but sadly they are responsible for some of the worst human diseases, in part again because they're so adaptable and can change life forms depending on which host they're cycling through. So while tragic, it is pretty impressive that they're able to cycle through these different species and be so successful. So I would just say it's very important to pay attention particularly when you're traveling, and guard yourself from exposure to the extent that you can. But on a brighter note, many species of protozoa are beneficial, super important to humans and to healthy natural communities in general. So I mentioned earlier that they serve as food for lots of different organisms, and they are one of the main components of zooplankton that form the principal diet of magnificent animals like the blue whale here. Krill, of course, is the main component of the blue whale diet, but what's an important part of krill diet? Protozoa. So the largest animal ever to have lived on Earth relies on a healthy community of protozoa, as do many things, including a lot of things that we like to eat, like fish, lobsters, clams, and crabs, and a lot of the other marine animals. We know that the protozoa did a huge number on Milwaukee's water inflow, but on the other side of the system, protozoans can play an equally impactful role in the beneficial side, as it's used in many wastewater treatment plants. So they play a predatory role in removing bacteria and other harmful organisms from the water, and they maintain an important physical function in many of the filtering systems. So that's really important. They're also crucial as natural decomposers in our soils. In fact, many gardeners will add beneficial protozoa to their soil to maintain a healthy balance, just in the same way that they may add things like fertilizers or calcium or things like nematodes. Protozoa play a really important role in helping a lot of animals digest, including termites. And termites may be one of the most ecologically significant animals on the entire planet. And earthworms, they help earthworms digest food. They also help ruminating livestock. Many of these are found only in the digestive systems of things like sheep. And, they are a strong component of the human gut biome, which, as we've learned, our gut biome is at its best when it maintains a healthy diversity of microorganisms, because that's what makes it difficult for potentially harmful microorganisms to take over and then cause problems with us. So protozoa are also used a lot in applied biological and medical research, so they help us there. And I guess, so we'll kind of wrap things up that even though there are some very scary protozoa out there, they are a crucial component of our ecosystem, a very large and very diverse group of organisms, important enough to be elevated to the status of kingdom. And if I still haven't convinced you to love protozoa, I will hand the microphone and the camera over to the protozoa so they can make a case for you in this epic tale with this equally epic title called Various Ciliated Protozoa. So let's all watch, listen, and enjoy. There's protozoa reproduction right there. I will send the link to that if you want to watch it again. And thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next week. I'll stop sharing my screen. And so I can see you. Feel free to turn your